All right, I'm going to call this September 28th, 2017 meeting of the AMATS committee to order. It is 1:40. Apologize for the late start, but we've got a lot of paperwork to get together here. So I'll do a roll call. Mr. Constant? Here. Mr. Welton?
Here.
Mayor is here, but he'll be back in a second. Ms. Heil?
Here.
And we have a quorum. Craig, will you be doing the public involvement?
Yes. All AMATS meetings are open to the public. If we have a business item, we'll have a presentation by staff or a consultant, and then the committee will be given a chance to discuss the topic. And then after that, the public will be invited to comment. We'll do that on each business item.
Thank you. Do we have approval of the agenda?
Move to approve?
Second.
Have any changes?
I do have one minor change in the interest of speeding things up and showing that I make mistakes with regularity. I did not make copies of the minutes, so we will not have minutes to approve tonight, today. See how nice I am? Cutting time off already.
Okay. Any objections to adopting the agenda with the one change? Okay, the agenda is approved. Okay, so I guess we're moving on to agenda item 5A, the 2015-2018 Transportation Improvement Program, Administrative Modification 16. Craig, will you be presenting?
Yes, so this administrative modification is to reflect the changes related to the split of the 5307 funds. These are Federal Transit Administration funds that you're probably aware they go to providers of public transportation, and in this case, those two entities in our city have to agree to the split. And so the split letter was recently signed, and so what you have in here in Table 7, the red did not show up, even though I did do it on a color printer, which you can kind of see the numbers that look a little different. Those numbers reflect the split, and this is, again, 5307 funds just in Table 7. Part of those funds go to the Municipal Public Transportation Department, and part of those funds go to the Alaska Railroad. In addition to those funds, those changes, there is one change in the roadway table, Table 3. If you look at the Abbott Road Rehabilitation Project, Phase 2, Jupiter Drive to Birch Road is about halfway down the page on Table 3. Again, Abbott Road Rehabilitation Phase 2. There was a line in there that is, you can see in strike-through now, it says illustrative funding is shown to allow project to advance if funds become available. So that is not expected to occur, that illustrative funding. So we just want to take that out of there. And the TAC recommended that change. That was the only change that they made. Other than that, we're asking you to approve this. The TAC at their last meeting recommended approval. Again, it shows the split that was agreed to between the railroad and the Public Transportation Department, or the municipality related to 5307 funds.
Thanks, Craig. Any comments from the committee, Mr. Welton?
I'm just, so we show this split through 2020. Was the agreement through 2020?
I'm not 100% certain. Mr. Sullivan with the railroad is here. He might be able to shed some light on that.
I'm Tim Sullivan, I'm the manager of external affairs at the railroad. The agreement's through 2018.
The lifespan of this tip is through 2018. The 2019 and 2020 years are illustrative. So the feds usually ask us to show what we kind of expect so we can give a sense to the public what might occur in those following years, knowing that it is illustrative and it's not, we don't know those numbers yet. So that's why I guess it shows in those outer years.
Any other questions from the committee?
Yes, just a quick question, if I might. We're referencing a letter signed on the September 4th. Is that available? Is that present for us?
Well, that is on the agenda page. Looks like I missed copying that off as well. So there's two mistakes.
Thank you.
But I do my mistakes publicly. It is on our website. It is available, and I can certainly send that around as well.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
You know, if you read it, what's interesting to me is part of it was a land purchase that maybe the deal hinged on. And I got a map from Steve Rebuffo showing that it's mostly water, the land that we would get. It's enough dirt that would extend the port somewhat. So
Any other comments from the committee? And the mayor's done this.
We didn't know all about that.
Any comments from the public? Okay. What's the will of the committee?
Move to approve.
Second.
Accept? Is it
Any
approved or
objections
accept?
to approving the motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved. Okay, we're moving on to...
Mr. Chair.
Sorry?
Sorry, we did forget to ask the public unless I missed.
He said it.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
Yeah, he
apologize.
said it.
I'm sure we have that.
I got this.
You got it. Third mistake, there we go.
Agenda item 5B, the 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, Tech Memo 1A, Craig.
Ms. Underwood will be sharing that with us today.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, my name is Vivian Underwood. I'm a transportation planner with AMATS, and happy to be here today. So for those of you who may not know, we are updating the 2035 Metropolitan Transportation Plan. It was adopted at the end of 2012, and it's a 20-year horizon plan that we update every 4 years. So the next plan is due to be adopted, finished, and completed with a bow on it by November of 2019. To be able to remain eligible to receive and expend federal dollars for new projects or new phases of any current projects. So we have 3 documents before you today because at your last meeting, several members asked that we bring forward to you some of the early technical documents that in the past have just been reviewed and considered at the Technical Advisory Committee level. But you're going to see these 3, and today we're asking for the Policy Committee approval for these documents as draft. They're going to remain draft until we do the public review draft. These documents feed into the next plan like this. We will not wholesale take text from these documents and put them, they're not like individual chapters for this plan, but the information will be there. But a lot of this information is background, a lot of it is technical, there are a lot of comparisons. A lot of it, most of it will not get into the plan actually, but it's the foundation. So the first document we're looking at is Technical Memorandum 1A, which is the goals, objectives, and performance measures. And this document has had quite a bit of review. We have a memo. You have the memo, the Tech Memo 1A itself, and then you have a comment response summary to Mr. Weddleton's comments. So just to make a long story short, we went out for public review and comment for 30 days, and we had a lot of good comments. A lot of the comments had to do with, they were more policy level comments, but we did make changes. And then we took this document was approved by the Technical Advisory Committee in August. So we didn't go back to them with Mr. Weddleton's comments, but we're bringing them to you today for your review. There were basically 5 administrative edits that staff felt we'd like to make, and those are on pages of your comment response summary that looks like this. They're on pages 2, 7, 8, 9, and 11. If you like, we can go through that. We can go through our administrative edits that we said we would make, and I believe we went ahead and made them in the document also, addressing Mr. Weddleton's comments. One of the things that I do think is worth talking about is his comment. I'm sorry. Well, anyway, it's a new objective I of 5I, and that is on page, I believe it's 22. I've got my wrong glasses on, I'm sorry. On the main document page, it's on page 22. Our goal with this plan was to make the goals and objectives more measurable. And that was because the Federal Highway Administration has a new
Sorry, could you,
It's page 23 of the thick set, the new set, and it's just 5I is the new one in table 4.1.
got it, thanks.
Yeah, just to explain what happened here. We looked at the 2035 Metropolitan Transportation Goals and Objectives. A lot of them covered so many different topic areas like safety, mobility, congestion. Some of the goals had like 6 major different topic areas in them. So to make them more measurable, we had to simplify them. So we tried to simplify the goals by focusing on just one topic area with each goal. So we now have 5 goals, and the objectives now focus on individual topic areas as much as we can. So some of the finer detail of the 2035 objectives may have been lost in some of this desire to make them simplified, if you can understand that. But Mr. Whittleton made a comment that made us think about something that we want to recapture, and that is, if you look at page 23, there's a new objective there, to match the street design to the use and character of the community neighborhood through complete streets, recognizing that character may vary from primarily commercial to primarily residential and from primarily urban to primarily rural. So AMATS is going to be developing a complete streets policy, which will also have a street topology in it. So we will also be matching that street typology to the land use typology. So this is going to be a powerful tool for policymakers to make decisions, and when developers come into town, we can actually start to look at one map and see how we're going to realize the goals and objectives of the comp plan that's just been adopted. So the idea is to integrate more completely land use and transportation decisions. And,
Mr. Chair, quick question. I had one that I'd already noted, and you're right on it, so I might as well ask it. And that is, what's the procedure? I'm so new at this, I don't know. When you have something that says develop policy, like, there were a set of them in there, and I didn't understand what that meant from a practical perspective. What does that translate into actively?
that's a good question. So in the adopted 2035 MTP, in Chapter 8, which is the information chapter, is where the policies landed. That may not be intuitive for some people. Usually you see goals, objectives, and policies all in one chapter. If you think we need to move the policies up to an earlier chapter, that's fine, but our intent was to address the policies in the action item chapter, the implementation chapter, as they did last time.
Let me re-ask that question.
Okay.
So I can frame it a little more to the actions themselves. In the developing, what is the process for developing a policy when you state in here, AMATS will develop a policy? Right, I hate to go so, like, bottom line, I don't understand the process to get there.
So can I jump in here just for a second? We actually had a meeting this morning with Craig and Aaron from DOT and Mr. Welton to go through some of these type of questions so that we could get some clarity for both of us, actually, I think, on some of these issues. So I think some of this might be better suited for
Off the table, okay.
but I mean, I don't want to, stop questions and whatever here, and I don't think with the people at the table I have any danger of doing that, but at the same time, I think some of these things are a little better to, I thought it was very productive this morning to kind of get some clarity on how this all rolls into the plan and how when we come into it, when we have comments, that type of stuff. So that might be a better venue for that, but that's up to obviously your discretion on how you want to do that.
Yeah, so we're being asked to adopt a table that states a policy will be developed. Right? And so I'm just curious how that policy gets developed. What's the process of making sausage? And so again, if that is a better topic offline, I will accept that that's the answer, but I don't know. It's hard to approve a plan that says X will happen without knowing what X means.
It's a process that, oh wait,
No, I'm not gonna say.
you're gonna jump in?
It's just, this is just a technical document that tells, so as they were developing this, they realized there was a deficiency, that there's a policy that needs to be made.
Right.
But they haven't even started on doing all the rest of the work that has to happen. There's still a tremendous amount of effort, so it's like a placeholder. So we
Yeah.
know that a policy has to be developed here, but as we get the projects that are gonna be nominated and the deficiencies that are identified and you look at the modeling and you look at all this, and then you look at where there's policies for these holes. Then they look at all that together and we'll start seeing the action plan at the end of the plan that says, this is what AMATS is going to do. They circle back and say, where or did we find holes? Now we've got to put an action item and a policy in to fill all those up before you can even finish.
Right.
But you don't have all the data yet. You can't answer some of these policy questions because you don't have any data to make a decision.
So then my assumption would be policy is drafted at the technical advisory committee and then comes here to be approved.
Mr. Constance, excuse me, through the chair, we were going to have a public review draft by, this is, as Ms. Heil said, these are just draft technical documents to feed in. You will get a chance to see the policy committee review draft that will have all of it in there. But you bring up a good point. Do you want to just wait till the public review draft to look at the policies? You probably want to be involved in creating some of those policies.
That's kind of what I'm
Yes.
hoping for, is to
So-
know when to engage in that policy development.
I would like to suggest that when we get to that point, that we have a work session with the policy committee.
Perfect, thank you.
That's all right.
And I believe last time, since I'm still kind of figuring out how this all worked, I asked to
Yes.
have a flow chart put together of the process so people can kind of look at it. And we might want to have a work session where we, for those of us who haven't been doing this for as long as some of our compadres here, to basically get a better understanding. Because I think the discussion we had this morning, the discussion I'm hearing now, are a little bit of concern about, well, I want to make sure that I don't miss my opportunity to have input onto this stuff because it's important to me. And I'll just say, as someone who's been involved in this kind of stuff my whole career, it is refreshing to see people who are looking at stuff and making sure that they understand what's there before they say, yeah, okay, let's go ahead with this. So it's, makes my job a little more challenging sometimes, but that's okay. That's what it's supposed to be about, so.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
We will provide a flow chart. I know, we struggled with this, actually. We have one, but it is so detailed, we thought it might be overkill, so. there
I
must
think that with an explanation, a work session, might be, those two things might go together well. If you just give us the flow chart, you're probably going to end up with a lot more questions than answers. But if we have time to sit there and you can kind of explain it to us, along with some folks who have been through the process before, that might be a good way to get all of us up to speed.
I realized we caught you all at a disadvantage because there was an assembly election that happened right after we had done sort of an introduction to this project to this body. So, and a lot of you have not been involved in the process before, and AMATS can be very complicated and confusing. So I think it would be a good thing to do. Okay, so, excuse me, so what would you like to do now?
I'd like to get approval of this one, but, I think if you continue on with, are you done with all the,
Well, I wanted to highlight that, that one objective in particular, and really that was in one of our responses to one of Mr. Weddleton's comments. He did have some good comments, and, but I think I don't need to talk anymore. What I would like to do is ask you all to consider what you'd like to do with this. I hope you've had a chance to read the comment response summary, and especially in response to Mr. Weddleton's comments. And then we are asking for your approval of the document. It will still remain draft. This document is not going to be set in stone, but we're not going to ask for any more, we're not going to go out to the public anymore with this until the public review draft. We can talk about these things, certainly at the charrette. Our next big public involvement push is going to be in November. It's going to be a 3-day public charrette, where we want to meet with people. We want people to come in and give us their ideas. Maybe they've read some of these goals and objectives and they think they need to be tweaked. We can take those comments, but we will not be providing any more comment response summary per se, like this. We'll carry all the comments that we get from today forward to preparation of the public review draft. Actually, it would be there's going to be an internal review draft, then a technical advisory and citizen advisory review draft, then a policy committee review draft, and then this body will release it for 45 days for the public review.
thank you. So I guess, I believe we have before us an option here of accepting the the comments that Mr. Weddleton made and were accepted by the staff. And then I believe there's additional comments that he would like to discuss. And if we approve the ones that have already, the staff has already accepted, and then if we look at the ones that he wants to talk about, then we'll need to amend this item and move forward. Is that-
So I think, so I'll make a motion to accept the amended report in front of us.
You have to ask for public comment.
Yeah,
Okay, but that would be, and then get a second, and then I'll offer up some amendments, and then we'll vote on the main body. Okay.
do you want to, but I think you need to talk about those before
So we
we
do a public hearing.
Right,
kind of
after you,
filters.
after you open it up, after he makes a motion, then we can talk about it, but they
Okay.
give it a presentation, now the public needs to comment, and
Okay.
then we can, once we open it up for a motion, then it closes all comment.
Okay, so public comments now? Okay,
It's public.
so public comments, and I would ask you to limit it to 3 minutes. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Cheryl Richardson, and thank you for these copies. It's really handy. I've gone through, and I have about 3 or 4 of the issue response statements I'd like to comment on. I made little notes. I'm going to try to be efficient here. On page 1, goal or objective in the middle, decrease the sum of housing costs plus transportation. And staff disagrees because the proposed goal does not align well with Anchorage 2020 land use and transportation goals. I would submit that it does, and perhaps it can be phrased better, but it's an issue of equity, and it's an issue of providing transportation in town for low-income people who either are spending too much on their housing because they're having to move far out, or they may be spending too much on their transportation by trying to maintain their cars. So that's one example of why that kind of language belongs in here. Perhaps rephrased, but that concept is important. Page 2, it's an example of how the previous goals and objectives have combined a number of environmental and quality of life goals into one. And staff disagrees with creating another goal, quality of life, and split up the sub-goals appropriately. The excuse is that the federal planning factor number 5 combines environmental and quality of life. There is no requirement for us to maintain the same priority as the federal government's does on our own goals and objectives. We can create our own goals and objectives to reflect our community priorities. Page 3, at the top 3A, the issue is, are we shooting for increased level of service, increased throughput at peak hours? And again, the feds are used as the excuse. One of the new federal highway performance measures for congestion reduction focuses on peak hour excessive delay. That's fine. We'll be measuring that, we'll be reporting on that. But if we treat that as a high priority, peak hour delay, it contradicts other community values, such as making our streets walkable. Simple objectives such as that. So I would encourage us again to take a second look at telling our people that because the feds require it, we have to do it the same way. Page 5, reduce congestion, same argument. Where the new federal highway performance standards for congestion reduction is focusing on peak hour excess delay. That's a repeat. Page 6. Sorry, these are so bulky. Gets to increase year-round vehicle miles traveled by bicycle and walking. Very reasonable goal. But staff disagrees because it's not, the particular objective 3K is not about changing mode share, because all modes need year-round mobility. That's a great statement, but it's also perfectly reasonable for Anchorage to place a high importance on increasing the mode share of biking and walking. So it's not a good excuse that we have a different objective that conflicts. Work it out. On page 10, I got one last thing. Down at the bottom, general comment. And it's similar. The idea is that we want a city where people can bike and walk safely on most roads. Not necessarily the Seward Highway, but most roads. It's going to increase our commerce, our health, our safety. And the response to this comment is the Metropolitan Transportation Plan does not address traffic calming. That is the purview of the traffic department on neighborhood and local roads. So I would say that the more we're chasing peak hour level of service, the less we are serving our community in terms of traffic calming. That's just a blanket statement, and then there are many other arguments behind that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Okay, I guess I'm a little confused here. I'm not sure we had comments from the committee yet, but are we doing the will of the committee now?
Tell me, I think
No,
you
no,
make
you
a
have a
motion,
motion.
someone seconds, then
Okay.
there's discussion, and I have 5 amendments.
Okay. All right, so comments from the committee.
I move to approve as amended.
Accept or approve.
Accept, is it accept or approve?
Which is it?
Approve as amended. Approve.
Okay, it's approved. Second.
Okay, any objections to approve?
Oh, I have.
No, this is just, hold on, it's just memo 1A, correct?
Right, yes.
Okay.
Should I say that explicitly? You want me to say it more carefully?
Well, just for help, yeah.
Sure. I move to approve Tech Memo 1A as amended,
As recommended by the chair.
amended by the Tech Home Advisory Committee.
Second.
I'd like to offer 5 amendments. Can I start now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, and what I'll do, if I'd probably best just work off of the issue response to my comment. We'll do our big versions of. And there's quite a few. I'll start at the top.
Familiar.
If you're there, the on table, this is regarding Tech Memo 1A, table 4-1, goal 4, support the economy. I recommend a new goal, plan for new technology such as autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles. My point there is this is not future technology, it's out there now. Other cities have them, and we'll have them crazy fast, and we need to be thinking about them. The staff response says this is not a measurable objective. Well, you could measure that, yes, we are planning with it, so you have a yes. But I'd say everything under that goal is similar. We have also under there enhance travel and tourism. And that's something that's also difficult to measure, right? It also says promote dynamic transportation system. How do you measure that? That's also tricky to measure. So I think the fact that it's tricky to measure doesn't mean it shouldn't be a goal in there. And we go on later on in these documents and in the process to come up with clear ways to document or to measure whatever goals we can in the ways we can. It's always going to be imperfect. But we need to be thinking about this. It's here, it's now.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my question, John, is how does new technology like autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles change the way we design our streets or the way we build our streets? Or
I don't know. That's why we need to look at it.
There's some thinking that if you have autonomous vehicles, you need fewer lane miles, and it changes what the transportation needs are, because if you have more autonomous vehicles, you can have central places for refueling, and there's a number of other changes that impact it. And it's actually, there's a fairly large body of preliminary study on this.
really interesting. Thank you.
And I would just echo that planning for where you might have fueling stations, in fact, where the first one might go, or where we're going to set up drop-off and pickup points in public facilities on major highways and major roadways. It seems like there's a lot of planning that could be done along those lines, and we need to get on it, or we're going to continue to be the city 20 years behind the rest of the country. We don't want to be that. Now, I think,
We still run dogs.
yeah, exactly, 100 years. I think about the bus barn discussion that's happening on the other side of our deal, and one part of that discussion ought to be electric buses and infrastructure for that. And everything we do regarding to transportation should be engaging with future modes.
Okay, other comments from the committee? Since this is response to staff, I'm assuming we want to have staff, there's a response to.
Yeah, that's cool.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. I did send out an email earlier to Mr. Hart and to Mr. Weddleton was carbon copied on that also, about autonomous vehicles. The fact of the matter is that the state of Alaska and the Assembly and the Division of Motor Vehicles and the insurance companies have all not really come together on how these things are going to impact us. We have no idea yet about if you're in an accident with an autonomous vehicle, who's at fault. That has not been decided yet. And my concern, and please forgive me, I'm passionate about this because I'm the ITS coordinator for the municipality. So I mean, I've been following this for like 17 years. And my request would be to you all and to the legislature to please come up with some policies. FHWA has provided guidance to states on what kinds of policies and considerations need to be put in place. What kinds of things you need. Licensing of vehicles as well as licensing of drivers. And you know, some of these transportation network companies are going to be using supposedly autonomous vehicles too. Well, some other cities do you want to have specific pickup and drop-off points for those vehicles? Or are these vehicles now going to take the place of all the single occupancy, privately owned vehicles driving around town to pick up their rides? New York City has done a study that says that it has severely, detrimentally impacted their town. It has worsened congestion. These transportation network companies think what autonomous vehicles are going to do. It is not the panacea that people think it is. And I think.
Question here?
Yes.
So I guess what I was asking for is staff recommendation was no change. I'm not hearing that from you. What I'm hearing from you is that there's a lot of issues out there which would
Argue for a plan.
mean to me that we do need to look at it.
Well, that's why we were suggesting that this be a policy. Staff should not be in the position of starting to just make assumptions that you all really ought to be making. You all need to be, you're the policy body. The legislature needs to be making decisions. Right now, there is a law in Alaska that allows for a certain number of experimental vehicles on the roads. And they said that the DMV is the one to provide these licenses for these vehicles. You call up the DMV, they don't know anything about it. I mean, that is a sad situation. There are only probably 3 legislators in this state who are even remotely interested in autonomous vehicles. Google wanted to come up here.
So without going into all the
I'm sorry.
details of.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine, it's fine. This is your area of interest and that's fine. But I guess the question I think that's here is, what is the difference between the policy and 4D plan for new technology such as autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles? I'm assuming when we would look into this, we would look into all those kinds of issues of, you know, making sure that all the different agencies are coordinated and we have, you know, issues of liability covered. I guess I'm not, the staff response is, sounds like a good idea, but let's make it a policy. I believe Mr. Weddleton is saying, let's put it in as 4D. Am I missing something here?
It's just that who's the lead on this?
Sorry?
It's who's the lead on this. It sounds like AMATS, or I don't know who would actually implement this. I have been trying for years.
But, man, it seemed to me that if there's a requirement that staff can't take action until there's policy set, at least at the municipal level, that would be one of the first recommendations, is that the municipality set policy on this. And
Oh, good.
that would be a terrific piece of advice, which we would take very much to heart and act upon.
Might I offer a slight amendment to the language then and say set policy and plan for slight amendment to the language? Then that puts the cart in the proper place behind
Thank
the
you.
horse.
That would,
You go back to horses,
I know.
we're like way past that.
Old school. Does that make sense?
So, just to understand, so you would rephrase it, add new goal 4D, set policy and plan for new technology.
Yep.
That's fine. And I'd have a comment. You outlined many complications that show to me, one, that you should do it. And two, clearly there's a need. I mean, if there's a need, it's like having been through this marijuana stuff, a roadmap for all the rules we need to make it happen. It is very complex, and
And if you really
Well,
miss
leave it up
out on
to
Google,
us.
I'll be bummed.
okay, so the motion's been modified. And
We need to formalize that.
No.
We don't have a second for your original.
I seconded it. I seconded it, but do we need to officially?
You have to make an
seconded the
amendment
original.
For each
Full document.
individual amendment.
I would move to amend that we add set policy and before the word plan on M4D.
second.
Now we have to discuss it, and then we have to vote on it.
Can I ask a question here procedurally from people who obviously know Robert's rules better than I do? Would it be possible for Mr. Weddleton not to make a motion for this before we amend it? Can we talk about it before he makes the motion? No?
We have to make
Well,
the
Robert's
motion.
is kind of,
He was a general. That's what house officer was. That's what
he obviously didn't have to get home for supper, but anyway.
Excuse me, through the chair, we had a question. Mr. Weddleton, are you asking for a new goal or a new objective? This is an objective 4D.
The goal is for an objective, is that the sub ones are objective?
Yes, sir.
That would be correct, thank you. It should be called an objective.
An objective?
Yes.
Okay.
So the whole thing is, you're moving to add in a new goal, a new objective 4D that says set policy and plan for technologies such as autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles.
For new technology.
You got it.
I'll second that.
I was already on the table. We
Sorry,
just need to
just,
vote.
it was clarified it,
Ross got
just
that.
clarified it.
You can
Okay,
call for a
so,
vote.
discussion on this?
Uh-huh.
I think we're done.
The only thing would be on how to measure it. So that's the only, I mean, that's the kicker about this whole thing is it's gotta.
Well, set
trying to
policy
find
can be measured, you either do or don't.
Yep.
Based.
Everything else under there is also hard to measure.
I know, but I just have to make sure I point that out.
Okay, could we have a reading just of what the amendment is?
I see the amendment as saying, add 3 new objectives.
I take it back, actually, we're just adding one. That
Just
was
the one.
part of my longer time.
Just on the first
So it's just that one.
Just one
It
objective.
says, set policy and plan for new technologies such as autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles.
Is that it? Okay, any discussion from the committee?
No,
No,
we're
okay.
closed.
All right, so,
Addition to it.
Yeah, vote.
okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, the motion, the amendment to the motion passes.
Right, now the next one.
Okay, and I have found, and as Mr. Kemp has pointed out, he must be home for dinner. It just goes a lot faster if everybody just agrees quickly with me. Okay, the next one, moving down, same page, the next item. Change to table 4.1, objective 4E, and I have a slight modification to what is printed here, and it would be decrease the sum of housing costs plus personal transportation costs. Needs a second?
Second.
Discussion?
Do that. What does that mean to,
What is
I'm
personal?
confused.
I put personal in there because I'm sorry, who answered? Did you, Aaron or Vivian, who responded to these questions?
We both
Oh,
did.
you wanted to-
I guess the big thing to ask is, what do you mean by decrease? How is the MTP supposed to decrease housing costs?
Well, it is a bigger picture of land use combining with transportation, which we all promise that we'll do. All our plans do that, and even this NPTP promises that it'll do that. But how do you do that? It's the sum of housing costs plus transportation costs. So if you work with our transportation, so you are doing projects that make it easier to live in affordable housing and to decrease the number of trips. So that's where the federal requirements talk about mobility and accessibility. And mobility is generally what we consider level of service, get rid of traffic jams. Accessibility is make sure you can get where you want to be quick and easy and cheap, short trips. And this is core to our comprehensive plans, core to the new land use plan we just adopted on Tuesday, is town centers, all that business. So what you do is you make sure that roads are built that make those town centers function better, and you are meeting the clear guidance of our plans. And also, the goal of that is to decrease the combination of housing and transportation costs. So how do you measure it? Well, we measure housing costs in a variety of ways, and transportation costs, I've seen measured what it costs. I don't know who's doing it or where, but they're out there. So, but the general goal is to make fewer trips, shorter trips, more accessibility as required in the FAST Act.
Through the chair, may I just suggest that now that we have a better understanding of what Mr. Whittleton's intent is, there are several goals that speak to that about integrating land use and transportation planning. And also that new 5I objective about complete streets, making sure that the street character matches the adjacent land use, that type of thing. So I think some people had concerns about exactly how does AMATS affect, but also we might have to put more money into transportation for it to be more effective rather than reduce the cost. It would be ideal if we could have low-cost, ubiquitous transportation that meets everybody's needs. But the reality is, the public transportation department is facing cuts. The reality is that the new plan is to reduce coverage. The comp plan calls for coverage of the whole city. We can't do that. We're not able to do that now with the budget we have. And it's a worthy goal, but it's so.
Okay, and I think you have phrased it in a way that is why I put personal, because when you think cost, it appears that you're thinking of the federal, state, and local dollars put into transportation. And what I'm talking about here is my cost of getting where I need to go. Because right now, I live in a dense neighborhood and I can ride my bike to Fred Meyer's quicker than I can drive. That's what we're looking for. Our comp plan talks about that. Our land use plan talks about that. Because we put a pathway at the end of a cul-de-sac that leads almost directly to that the grocery store. That's the kind of project. So I'm not talking about, I understand that yes, it gets expensive building these things, but my personal cost, because of those expenditures, has gone down. It's not a radical idea. Independence Park was designed in 1974.
Can I just ask a question? Where does this metric been used elsewhere?
I don't think it's a new, someone who knows better, I think this is pretty common. We measure this, I've seen in meetings that we've had on a variety of things that they say, oh, you were transportation disabled if your transportation cost is over 30% of your housing, of your income or something. And you see stuff like this all over the place. I don't track who puts it out, I just nod my head and go, oh.
I guess I'm a little confused here though, because I think you're mixing two things or you're separating two things that can't be separated unless you're expecting somebody in Texas to pay for the infrastructure in Alaska, because individuals pay for that infrastructure regardless if you ride your bike or not, if you're paying taxes. So someone is paying for that. So I'm not sure, I guess I'm a little fuzzy on this personal transportation cost. What's the dividing line there? I mean, if I pay state, well, not state, but if I pay federal income tax, part of that goes to federal highways, which money comes back here. So that's a cost to me. That's a personal cost to me to build this infrastructure. So I'm not sure how you quantify. I think I know what you're trying to get to here, but I'm not sure I understand what this language would.
Well, I would say that it is true that the people in Texas are paying for our roads. I think for every dollar in federal gas tax we put in, we get $5 back. Thank you, USA. And then we put in, I think, many billions a year to shore up, because even that's not enough. So we are the benefactors of all kinds of other people. We are basically freeloaders on the rest of this country, regards to roads. So but I understand your point. Do we factor in all taxes and so on? There are stats out there. They do the American, community survey every year, and it seems like they're getting housing costs, and if your housing cost is more than 30% of your income, then you're housing challenged. They do food costs, and if your food is more than X% of your income, and I imagine they're doing
Practical
travel.
application, how would they use this?
Here's a suggestion that I have heard on the topic. Mr. Chair, and that would be idea of focusing our infrastructure on density as opposed to on sprawl, or focusing our infrastructure on complete streets that function fully and provide efficient access as opposed to just building up wider, fatter roadways that are only at full use for 30 minutes a day, twice a day, right? The places where people are actually active. And I think that's how you achieve savings, is by investing in places where the demand is all the time instead of just those limited
And
times.
I understand that, but don't get me wrong, because I'm air quality, congestion is not a good thing, so, but I'm looking at what we use AMATS dollars for, which is typically eligible funds on the big road systems, and a lot of the little roads that would be most beneficial for this type of thing is really not completely under the purview of AMATS.
I could suggest, though, that there are a number of large facility roads traveling right through dense neighborhoods that could use a lot of love to see them function in ways that are beneficial to the region and simultaneously beneficial to the people who live in those places. And those investments are the ones that are ultimately going to save time and money, I think. But we're off on a pretty far philosophical tangent, I think.
Yeah, and I guess the question I have here is, so if housing goes up, but transportation costs go down and the sum is less, then we've succeeded here? Or if transportation goes up and housing goes down, we've succeeded here? It doesn't, I guess combining those two things, and you want a decrease of the sum of those two things, I'm not sure that's really what you're trying to get to here. And then I guess I've heard this a couple of times, this not looking at the level of service at peak hours. I mean, if you go to Fred Meyer on a Saturday morning, you're going to see a whole bunch of checkout stands that have nobody in them. If you look at our generating capacity in the city, you're going to see a whole lot of capacity that sits there and is not used 90% of the time. Same thing with the water supply, same thing with almost any type of thing we provide. Now, can we do that better? You're absolutely right, but I think looking at level of service and not looking at peak is something that I don't know any industry or any provider that does that. Internet, water, electricity, Fred Meyer, that's what they all do.
I'll
So,
look at this in detail shortly.
oh, okay. Get ahead of ourselves. Okay, so where are we at on this?
I don't mean to confuse people. What I want to do is basically, we have words in here that say we will build our transportation system in to reflect our land use plans. We do that, said very often. And then when we go through and we weight them, it's not in there because it's hard to measure. So I'm trying to get something in there that is easier to measure. I haven't managed to do that here. But we give a lip service to following our land use plans, but we simply don't do it when we build our roads. So this is trying to get down to some core variable, and don't believe I managed to do it here.
You'd probably get another bite at the apple somewhere.
Yeah, I'd be willing to withdraw this till I think this out and we get something crystal clear.
I think that's smart.
Do you have to have a second to withdraw the motion?
I was the seconder.
So I'll skip that one, and let's see where we are here. Okay, moving to page 3 of the comments, responses to my comments. And had some discussion on this already. I would like to move regarding, it's table 4.1, 4-1, 3A, strike the words during peak hour purposes. Why would I do that? Mr. Kemp's points are certainly can say some validity. Decreased travel time would include peak hour, would include other times as well. We focus on peak hour, and we look and we build our roads so as to get a level of service, C or D or something at rush hours. And I think what I've seen is some math that seems fairly compelling sometimes. You look and you say you have tens of thousands of people traveling at that time, and if we could speed it up by 1 minute, and their value of their time per hour is $25, $30 an hour, then any engineer can do that math in about 13 seconds, and they say we get billions of dollars of benefits and all we spent was $30 million. And you have a cost-benefit ratio and you say, How can you argue against that? You can argue against that because, did an engineer do the math in 10 seconds? Okay. You can argue that because it doesn't factor in other values. And one is it encourages bigger roads, bigger than we need, that aren't used at capacity for 23 and a half hours a day. It takes resources away from other things that are important, which could be building roads in places that increase our housing stock, which is a critical need in all of our plans. It could be roads that decrease the length of our trips. So if you only look at that variable, that dollar amount, you're neglecting all these other goals. And it's also true when it ignores the fact that when we drive home during rush hour, we don't expect it to flow as quickly as it does at 1 a.m. or even noon or 2 p.m. in the afternoon. So our expectation is different. So chasing peak hour level of service, we're overbuilding our roads, and it's more than we need. And I'd say another point, if you look, there is a chart here that shows places where we have level of service F, I think, at peak hour. And it is actually fairly few places. So we've done a good job over the last few decades of getting better performance on our streets. We also, chasing peak level of performance, we have a couple examples coming up. One is we are building right now, almost done, a connection, I think it's called the 76th, to go underneath Seward Highway, and it connects at Lower Road. And this is to take pressure off of Diamond and Seward and Old Seward Highway to increase the level of service there. We have sacrificed that neighborhood at Lower Road to take pressure off an intersection that is very congested most of the day. But I'm not willing to see us chasing level service, peak hour level service, destroy a neighborhood like Lower Road. We are making an extension. Now there's one called Scooter Lane that just dumps you onto the highway, and that goes through undeveloped commercial area, and it doesn't seem to have a big negative impact. But when it is completed, it goes under the highway, and it goes into Independence Park, right down Vanguard, through a neighborhood. So to take pressure off of a busy intersection, we're going to destroy a corner of Independence Park. And that's not proper. And that's because we're focusing on peak hour level of service, and we want to make it better at Old Seward and Abbott or Diamond, whatever you call it. And I think we've skewed it. So this doesn't say we put money into beating rush hour. In fact, I think 80% or 90% of our money will continue to do that. But we need to skew it a little more towards protecting neighborhoods, be a little more accommodating, that we will not destroy a neighborhood to decrease congestion at a busy intersection. So,
You didn't make a motion.
I didn't make a motion, did you?
No.
I said you didn't, I said strike the.
I second. I didn't, so it was good predicate.
So anyway, that is my view on level of service. So we are not saying don't decrease rush hour traffic. We're just taking off that emphasis a little. I would also say this matches the phrasing on table 5-3, which just says decrease congestion.
That was, excuse me, through the chair, that was an error. We should have also corrected table 5-3 to say during peak hour.
So you got that right. This is the error.
No, it's at peak, during peak hour. We added that back in. I should like to say through the chair, John McPherson is on the telephone right now. And this is a really important issue. It has to do how we do the modeling it has to do through everything, all of our analysis for future needs, traffic deficiency analysis. So if John can hear us, I wonder if he could weigh in on the discussion of not decreasing traffic just for peak hour.
I am on the phone. If somebody has a question, I think the debate is an accurate one, and I think you have to figure out if you're building for the peak hour or for maybe a peak period. The one thing I would say about the travel time is that it's if you're going to decrease travel time, are you worried about travel times on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning? So some of these objectives are pointed towards or focused on the problems that are trying to be resolved.
Is that a question to me? Your voice echoes from on high. It's very impressive, John.
Scary, actually.
Well, I would say, you don't have to increase travel times on Saturday mornings because you can get wherever you want to go lickety-split already. So we have succeeded in that. We just put that down as a success.
Well, I'm saying as an objective, are you, when you remove during peak hour periods, then are you focused on just any time of day or any time? I think the peak hour periods has been an objective in there for a number of years because that's when the problems occur.
Question.
I would say that's when some problems occur. That's when problems with takes you longer to get home occur. But there are problems throughout our system that are also extremely important.
So I guess the question I think that's being asked, the question that I have is, what does this mean, decreased travel time, if we're not focusing on when whatever it is we're looking at has its highest flow? Because why would you do anything to increase capacity on a road if you weren't looking at the peak times? I guess I don't quite understand. If we just say decrease travel time, the only way you're going to decrease travel time, because like you said, unless you're going 100 miles an hour when there's no one else out there, which is illegal, if you're following the speed limit, that's the limit most of the time when there's not too much traffic to slow you down. The only time you're going below the speed limit is when traffic is so heavy you can't physically do that. So I'm not sure what this means. Decreased travel time. If you're not looking at peak hours, then what are you looking at?
Well, you know, there are, as you go into different points in the document here, when you get into the criteria that you're measuring, you get into vehicles mile traveled, it's the vehicle time traveled, vehicle hours, VHT, you know, which are just broadly done. I mean, it's just, you continue to look at those variables that you have in there. And those don't, your vehicle miles traveled and vehicle hours traveled don't say at peak hour, they just say broadly amongst all users. How do you decrease those? So you continue to do that. Try to decrease the sum of vehicle hour traveled and vehicle miles traveled.
Well, one of the new, through the chair, one of the new federal measures is to decrease, is to focus on peak hour excessive delay. It's a new measure. And we have always, though, with our model, with our transportation model, we have always looked at peak hour.
Right.
And in the discussion, I think Mr. Kemp has a good point. How are you going to analyze it if you don't look at certain where the demand is highest? You know, the travel demand model is all about demand. Who's using the road the most when, you know? And the whole travel demand model is based on, you know, that. So we focus it morning and evening peaks. Also, the noontime peak is starting to get to be more important too, but we haven't included that. But and the evening peak starts to spread. You can start to see characteristics of people's driving habits, and that can actually help you with coming up with strategies for how to reduce some of this congestion. You know, and if I leave 10 minutes earlier in the morning, I'm golden. You know, I have a 13-minute commute, and I love it, coming from South Anchorage. It's great. And
one thing, I realize that my analogy of Fred Meyer and Saturday morning and, you know, the size of the generators that we have to have is not a good, doesn't fit this model exactly, because when we do that, we're not impacting a neighbor or a neighborhood. So I realize I'm cognizant of that difference here. But I will say that we do it, at the Department of Transportation Public Facilities, we do a lot of things that, I mean, if we wanted to just transport people from Wasilla to here, we would have a road with no exits or entrances between there and here. That would be the most efficient way to get people from there to here. But we don't do that. And we also, as we talked this morning, I mean, in my neighborhood, they put in bulb, you know, intersections so people slow down. They put in speed bumps so people slow down. And we do that too. We put in traffic circles to try to, you know, slow down and get people not so many head-on crashes and stuff like that. So it is a mixture here, but I guess I'm still not quite following what we would get to by just saying decreased travel time without focusing on think we have an answer here.
No, I just have a question. I'm wondering if this is more of, instead of an objective, because it sounds there's a conflict here in the sense that there's a desire to have a clear, precise objective that can fit into models, which means you have to have something measurable, versus a policy type approach that should say, whenever you're looking at a problem, you're going to try to not adversely affect neighborhoods
So
in
this-
your thing. So in a way that's like, let's
Double
try to
bottom line.
disconnect the items, and if it's a modeling thing, some do their modeling with, the peak and then the model thing, but on a policy, the policy is, when we look at a road project or a problem, we have to say that the last resort is dealing with a neighborhood, because that's more of a policy thing, in my mind.
We're just making
Through the
a,
chair, this may have to
Mr.
do also, excuse me, I'm sorry.
join
Excuse
this
me.
in lieu of the mayor on here.
Yes.
I'm sorry, thank you. So right now, in the current 2035 adopted program, plan, we do have a policy that to look at different levels of what is the acceptable level of service for different parts of town. And it's my view that maybe perhaps that policy might get more to the heart of what Mr. Wellington was driving at. I think when you're saying, do we have to plan for peak hour, and do we want peak hour traffic everywhere? There may be parts of town, like town centers, with the land use plan, land use, where as a community and with Department of Transportation and Public Facilities, we come to an agreement that say, do we really need level of service C in this area? We have said this is going to be transit-oriented development. We said this area is going to be walkable, this town center. We're going to have transit supportive corridors. Do we really do we have to have level of service C for vehicles, or will it be okay if we lower that to D, and at the same time try to bump up level of service for walking and biking? That's one of the things, frankly, that we would like to explore with the community at the charrette.
So I guess to maybe make sure that we do get home for supper. I guess I have no problem with decreased travel time, because then you can measure it at the peak, or if you want, you can measure it at 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't think you're gonna get a lot doing that, but if that kind of takes this and expands what we're looking at somehow, I'm still not clear on that, but I have no problem with that.
Yeah, so a couple of things. If it's feasible, or if it's in there somehow that I haven't seen, to have a double bottom line, double value that we're aiming for, which is that our facilities address peak level of service and we do our best there, but at the same time, we're building alternatives that allow people to make better choices, whether it's get on my bike and go, as John had said, down a trail system that will get me to work in 8 minutes instead of the 12 it takes on a car, or any number of things. But if we are continually focusing our highest value on level of service, peak hour, then we get into a conundrum where we're going to continuously be expanding all of these facilities that are the main facilities. And to use your metaphor of the grocery store, right? If you start taking out actual stacks of groceries to put in more grocery lanes, at some point, you're going to actually make your system fail, because no one's going to want to come there because you don't have the thing they need there, right? And so people are just going to pass you by because plenty of aisles are available for you, but you can't get your needs met. And so really, it's a balancing of those two issues that seems to be, there's a lot of language towards focusing on the land use and impacts, how it relates to the zoning and around areas, the zones around areas that are transportation oriented, but there's not a lot of action to that, I think. What's notable about this plan and the measurement criterion is that the highest value is consistently placed almost strictly on peak hour level of service. I think that's what I'm seeing as the concern here. And so how we get that double bottom line built in is really the question that I would like to see.
Could I ask Craig, because we had this very discussion this morning. Craig, could you jump in here and give your...
Well, yeah, I was just about to say that, we have the MTP, which is clearly, it's very important. It's our 20 years, our big plan. It's 20 years of what are we going to do. But if we look at the projects we actually do, those are built through the TIP. And the TIP, which you have the criteria on your agenda as an informational item later on, in the roadway category, there are 14 possible criteria that we look at, and one of them relates to congestion. It's just one of the 14, and it's not the highest weight. The one with the highest weight is safety. So, a road project is going to, and again, this is just for the roadway category. We have separate for non-motorized and for CMAQ. So in this particular category, just one of the 14 relates to level of service. The other 13 relate to, livability, quality of life, preserves existing facility, economic benefits, and just a lot of other categories. So something may score well under reduces congestion because it moves your level of service from the E to the whatever. But you have 13 other ones that are going to be in there. So we build a lot of road projects that don't relate to capacity. So I think that, it's important to have your goals in there, but when we get to, pardon the phrase, but where the rubber meets the road, we're talking about a lot of other things that impact it far and away above level of service.
Kent, is there anybody who has any objections to this, taking out during the peak hour period? I realize Roberts is probably rolling around in his grave right
No,
now.
that's fine. That's how you do it. You call for a vote.
Yeah,
Or you say if there is there objection?
are there any objections to this, taking this out? Because I think we've
Beat that horse.
beaten this moped to death.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
All right.
And I appreciate the points on this that were made. I think we will have a good plan even with this change. Okay, so moving to the bottom of that page, the next is a table 4-1, objective 3C, and I move that it read, establish an adequate number of access points from, adding the words developed and likely future subdivisions to adjacent high-order streets. Give me a second and I'll talk.
Second.
Thank you. Okay.
I'm in the book.
And just the discussion here is have reading access points from subdivisions to adjacent. Okay, so that's fine. But there are subdivisions that cannot be developed because they don't have a secondary access. So if we only focus on existing subdivisions, we're neglecting large areas of land that could be developed. Were we to put a road in, and I know the hillside best, so I just know Mountain Air. Were that put in, we'd open up hundreds of home sites, and if we could figure out a connection between Upper Potter Valley and Golden View, that would also open up hundreds of sites. And so this just adding the likely future developments in there opens the door for those.
So I have a question on this. I guess, and I just asked Mike to confirm, but my experience with this in other parts of the country is that someone's going to develop a subdivision, they put in infrastructure, which could include a road, water, sewer, that type of stuff. So I guess I'm not exactly sure how that would work if we made a decision as an organization that this area needs to be developed, so we build a road out there to have access?
That is done. The two that I'm describing, Mountain Air would serve a huge number of lots, including these properties will never be developed because anyone who would develop the landlocked properties essentially wouldn't make enough money to do the road. I mean, it has to be something that has done by the public or done with public participation, or it simply won't happen, and we will never develop those properties. And I mean, there's many instances. I mean, why is O'Malley Road and Huffman and DeArmond? And I mean, they all lead up. This is just a continuation of those deeper into the hillside with vacant land ready to be developed.
But those roads weren't built with state funds or with TIP funds. They've been improved with that, but they weren't built with that.
It's unfortunate, but
The property
try to fix
that
that.
comes to mind is the one that's across from Target, like 100th and C Street there, or, that, is it C and O'Malley, and that section in there is an area that's kind of trapped by state roads. you know, and that won't really be developed because it's not feasible at this time because of access and infrastructure. And so to me, that's the kind of property that comes into mind that is actually hemmed in by state facilities.
So just to summarize here, what I think we're saying is that this would look at already developed subdivisions if they need more access, and also look at, is there a good potential for this area to be developed? That would come into the consideration, which wasn't included before.
I mean, I think it's fairly minor, it just opens the door a little bit to looking at other projects.
And the phasing that's discussed in the new land use plan. You know, it kind of gets into the phasing conversation, like kind of like a local version of a TIP.
Okay, again, can I, if there's no other comments from the committee, could I get anyone from staff to, if they have any, here?
As a person who actually is going to be dealing with these later on, I'm not sure how AMATS has the authority to do this. I have an objection with this objection because AMATS doesn't actually have the authority vested to require the access from these lots. That is up to the municipality and then the state when we come through and kind of do road projects. So I would see this objective as being a problem in general because I'm not sure how AMATS would go about establishing an adequate number of access points from subdivisions. Because it's not up to AMATS to decide those numbers.
So your point is 3C in any way, shape, or form needs to.
From my point as staff at DOT, in regard to how I work with AMATS, I don't know how to implement this objective at all. In any way, shape, or form.
Whether it's changed or not.
Yeah, to 3C itself. And this is a carryover from the previous MTP, just so you know, this is not a new objective that was added in with this one.
Can we ask John McPherson, maybe? Is that where it came from?
It's on the previous.
Previous MTP.
Or just
It's just
carried through?
previous
Yeah.
MTP.
So you just delete the whole thing. Just offhand, if you do, also on table 5-3, item 3C has a parallel. So any change we make here would have to be reflected there as well.
Correct. That brings a question up, what about Scooter Road? Right? How did-
Level of service.
Right, well, but it was a TIP-funded program, right? Scooter Road had AMATS funds applied to it.
No,
That was all local?
I believe so.
That's a state highway on-ramp.
The on-ramp onto.
That's a state highway on-ramp.
It's not AMATS funds, it might have been NHS.
Well, the highway project was AMATS funded.
Right.
Right.
And it built the off-ramp
NHS.
onto Scooter, but
Which-
Scooter existed before that.
But essentially access from a state facility into a neighborhood that isn't, you know, AMATS is in the business of creating new off-ramps and on-ramps to facilities. And that, I have one that we're just finishing right there, Scooter Road. And so the question of it, it's not done, it actually is done.
Scooter Road is a national highway system, it is not an AMATS funded project. It is national, it's state.
Yeah.
So that whole highway improvement was not in our program at all?
It's from the national highway system, which the state controls the allocation
We
of.
just show it in a table.
Yeah,
I see.
It's in our
Eight,
table.
but we don't
Wasn't an allocation from us.
That's beyond our.
We didn't,
get in the back tables.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we have 3C, which was a carryover, which we don't like, apparently, some folks don't like it at all, and then we have an amendment to the language here. This is just a test of my ability to do Robert's Rules of Order, I think.
I mean, you've never built any, so this was in there and it was totally ignored and.
Yeah, through the chair, yeah, this is awkward for us because it says, establish, this is an AMATS plan, we have no authority to do this. This comes about when you make comments on plats as they come through, and road projects, Title 21 addresses new development, right? So actually, our comment here, this new development can't even address by Title 21. We had a project a while ago, years ago, out in Chugiak Eagle River to look at additional connections in already built developments to help improve emergency response. The community was not, we didn't get very, people really, it's hard to get this kind of thing built, you know, to get support for these kind of things. Also, who's going to pay for it? Under new development is one thing, there's a process for that. But developments that's already exists, you know, who would pay for that? In ARTSA, I guess you could go do it at the CIP, or the ARTSA could do it through, if they wanted to do it. But out in Chuquiaquila River, they don't bond for projects, you know, and these goals also apply to them.
My point is, I want AMATS money to pay for it. Instead of adding a 6th lane to the Seward Highway, we just freed up a huge amount of money, and we put it into projects that provide more housing, which is a very important goal on our comprehensive plan and our new land use plan. That's my thinking. And you're saying this doesn't get us there, or
Well,
could?
so it would help if we had some kind of, something in code to help us put some teeth. Actually, I mean, but it's not really our responsibility to do. I think it's more of really, this is not up to us to do this.
John is suggesting that it could be.
It could be. Well,
He's suggesting a change in AMATS funding decision-making, that AMATS would incent housing development, or, not just housing, but, development generally in Anchorage, and that would become one of the objectives of the
Well, actually, it could.
program.
One of the things that the land use plan calls for, I think is an action item, is to look at secondary road connections to help alleviate, is that where you're going with
Well,
this?
that's basically the 2 examples I did, are those secondary road connections. And if we claim that our transportation plan will working hand in hand with our land use plans, and we ignore opening up new land to housing, then we're not looking at our land use plans, because that is a total huge issue in all of our plans, open up land for housing.
And I understand where you're going with this. Maybe it's just a matter of how it's phrased. I think that's a great thing to include here. Especially because if you want these town centers, we're going to need the secondary access so that we don't clog up our arterials.
Can I suggest here, because I think this establish an adequate number, I think before we get to that, we need to look at the, I hate to use this, but roadblocks to doing something like this, that we need to look at. So I guess what I would suggest is perhaps staff could look at this and come up with what they think would work, and maybe work with Mr. Weddleton, see if that kind of gets where he's trying to go with this, and we can come back with this next time.
Yeah.
Does that work?
Do we want to wait a month to
Well, this
get
is
complaints?
one-
This is holding everything up.
You're so
How about the word encourage? This is John McPherson again. Just one suggestion. This is fairly common to see something like this. Usually it happens in the land use code, but adequate connections are necessary for emergency access and for evacuation, and sometimes congestion reduction. You don't want all your access necessarily at one intersection. But this strikes me as odd as an objective of the plan. It looks more like a policy that is implementing parts of the plan, and you're not going to want connections to all higher order streets. You're going to want it to comply with your functional classification. You're not going to want to dump more intersections necessarily onto a controlled access facility, for instance. So it does seem like it needs a little work, and maybe is better as a policy.
When do policies happen, and where do they show up, Craig?
And I could answer that question too. The goals and objectives, they sort of flesh out the broad vision. To me, then you develop alternatives, and you have, sometimes the solutions are projects to be built, but sometimes the solutions are policies, so that designers and developers know how to respond appropriately so that they are helping to implement the plan. And so the way we have it planned out is, we will be developing policies. They will be part of the alternatives packages, and they will have, input process and approval process as kind of the next phase.
Go ahead.
So were that to happen, would it open the door for AMATS money to be available to build roads to new areas for housing development. Because there's a policy. If the policy says you have to have 2 egresses from your subdivision because of various safety concerns, that's where we are now. And the problem is it's too expensive for any developer to create that in many cases. So it doesn't happen. So we don't succeed in meeting our housing goals.
Well, I think, how AMATS money is spent sometimes comes with some federal strings, and then, it's up to this policy committee to decide how and where to spend it. And I guess if you chose to spend it on, subdivision access roads, that I'm not sure if you can do that with federal funds or not, but.
Okay.
So you're gonna call for voter withdrawal? I guess those are 2 questions.
Well, I just want, I guess I made my point why this is here. Is it more effective as a policy, or should it be here as an objective? I mean, if it's here as an objective, it's pretty much right up front out.
I just think it has to be worded better if it was an objective.
Which would be.
That's what they were gonna work on.
Okay, so if we were to work on this, then we can't really approve this thing today because there's a piece missing.
Well, keep in mind that all of these tech memos are approved conditionally in the sense of they're all going to go into the public hearing draft that you guys are going to have later. So you're just approving it now so that we can get started and continue the work we've been doing. We can tweak this as we go.
There's nothing on that that's gonna hold up work if it gets adjusted later.
So I withdraw the motion, or my motion is tweak this language?
Withdraw the motion.
And
then
trust them to do it.
have them do it.
Which we will obviously do with
Okay,
you.
I withdraw the motion, but let's try to work on this.
Sorry, just for clarification, are you looking to have it as an objective or as a policy?
I need to learn more.
Okay.
So we'll withdraw this and we'll talk about that.
Okay.
Get to learn more. Just figure out wherever it's effective. I mean, I don't want to throw things in where they don't belong.
Thank you.
I think you put in the words like secondary road systems instead of maybe access point, for subdivision access points, because that seems to be a different thing.
Okay, if my count is right, there's one more.
Oh, who's counting?
This stuff.
I am.
Well, I think we should also look at the clock. I have
Yeah.
Okay.
half an hour.
I told you, if everyone just agreed with me, we would.
Well, you got a quorum.
Okay, so I think,
Page 9. That's my, here,
no, I actually have.
is 16.
No, I can live with that. That's fine. I think I might have. Oh, I think that might be it for this document.
Okay, so,
We can make some comments. Not as a motion,
okay,
before we, I guess we'll move to approve the document. don't we?
right, so I believe we have
We have a motion.
a motion, we have two
So we
amendments.
have two amendments.
Two amendments,
So now we go back to the original motion as to approve it with the amendments.
okay, so we have the original motion to approve 5B, technical memo, goals and objectives and performance measures with amendment 1, which is on page 1, both of the amendments are on page 1. The first one is to 4D, set policy and plan for new technology such as autonomous vehicles and electric vehicles. The second amendment is to decrease the sum of.
No, we pulled that.
Oh, I'm sorry, that one's out. The second one was decrease travel time, remove during peak hour periods.
Yep.
And again, on that one, table 5-3 can reflect that same thing.
With table 5.3 reflecting that. So, do I have,
Does anybody object?
does anybody
I
object?
do have a comment before, so for comments on the same.
Okay,
Okay, one, thank you for your patience with me. This is not a comment for any change, but looking at this document, table 2-4, you've got draft MTP prioritization criteria. One is by functional classification. Collector equals 1, arterial expressway 2 points, and highway/interstate 5 points. So again, with my points on building just the big roads for level of service, this is so heavily skewed toward making those highways bigger. And we have neighborhood land use development issues that are at least as pressing, and this valuing skews away towards just building more, faster, bigger highways and not solving those other problems. Further down in that table, you have cost, and in parentheses, length times average annual daily traffic. And I'm not clear where the dollars come that we would see with cost. But again, this double counts with your functional classification, which would typically have more average annual daily traffic. So again, I just feel this thing is skewed towards more, bigger, wider highways and not these other critical goals that we have in our plans.
Okay, I think Roberts would be, like, we're supposed to be talking about the two amendments here, I believe.
No,
So-
no, wrong product.
We're talking about the document now.
The overall, we're doing overall.
Those comments were on Tech Memo 1B.
Well, I'm in the wrong one.
Screening.
Yes.
Yeah, oh, okay.
I have one last question about this. It's just a simple question, clarification. On page 41 of the actual Tech Memo 1A, 5D, transit service with a minimum weekday headway of 30 minutes. What's a minimum headway?
Through the chair, that's the time between bus arrivals. That's like, a bus would arrive at noon, and then the next time would be 30 minutes after that.
Right.
So there's a 30-minute wait time between buses.
And so we're setting out, or maybe we're aiming for a minimum of 30-minute headway, Mr. Hassan?
I believe they were looking at previous plans in which we had hourly service. So certainly something shorter than an hour, 30 minutes would be appropriate. Whether that should be the goal, I leave to the policy committee. Certainly you know that we are doing 15-minute headways.
Right.
So already past that marker and we're going to 15. The next step after 15 is twofold. Either it's sort of a high-intensity bus corridor or it's BRT, which is on average every 7 minutes. So it depends on the aspiration where your value is. Do you want to keep it at 30 or do you want to aspire for something different?
Yeah, it just seemed like a pretty high minimum, right? Because it gets worse from there, right? It gets worse from there. So, okay, well, I'm not going to make a motion to change it, but it's something I would like folks to consider as we move forward with this document. And think if that's how you guys would propose we continue it, and then we can discuss it at the policy level when it's germane. Thank you.
Through the chair, we're kind of confused. Which document are you on?
That's Tech Memo 1A,
On what page?
page 41.
It's on page 42 of the one that was passed
Oh, I'm
out
sorry,
today.
yeah, I'm on the
It's
one
under goal, proposed goal objective 4C.
Applicability?
It's actually goal 5D, table 5-3. So I didn't cross-reference it to the one you handed out today, I'm sorry.
Okay, would you go? On the,
Just say, if anybody has any objections to the,
okay, does anybody have any objections to the motion for the two amendments?
approval of number one,
And-
Tech
and-
memo
and-
is A.
1A.
One
As
is
amended.
as amended. Seeing none. Let's move on. Okay, so now we're on to agenda item 5C, 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan, Tech Memo 1B. Craig?
Well, this is heavy, but we're talking about the initial screening criteria now, so I guess we'll hear from John. Mr. Reynolds.
We already talked about it.
Just continue where you left off.
You know, I don't necessarily, well, it may end up being an amendment, but not necessarily for me, but I would say looking at Tech Memo 1B, and I'll describe what I think has happened, and I may be wrong, but I had been working from a version that was not the one that came out of the TAC. I think it must have printed it just before you switched what was online. But I looked at the one from the TAC, it's online now, and in the TAC, page 7, you have table 2-1 was changed so that it's just 4 criteria. And it was quite a number more, so we kind of made it shorter. And that feeds into table or 2-2, which is comparison of table 2-1 with the goals. But table 2-2, the various categories were not changed to match the ones on table 2-1. So table 2-2 doesn't really make sense with table 2-1 changes.
Aaron?
Nothing was changed on table 2-1. There's still 13 plus criteria that we're using. So it starts on page 5 with operational improvements and goes to page 7 with deliverability is the last one. All the stuff kind of at the bottom of the page are footnotes explaining what each criteria is. So it's kind of broken the table up into 3 separate things, but it's all one table.
Might be the problem with looking online, but I did not. It wouldn't be. Okay, 2-1.
2-1 here, 2-1 here, 2-1 here.
You know, looking online, something's very different. It's like 4 categories of the one online that I saw earlier today. It was a total revamp of table 2-1. Unless I was in the wrong document, but
Well, while you look, I will make a motion to vote to approve the Technical Advisory Committee's recommendation for Tech Memo 1B.
Second. Any objections?
I do have a question.
Sorry?
Let's talk about it.
Yeah, looking at table 2.1 again, I know that in the TIP documents that were informational, there's a screening criteria, kind of weighting that we'll discuss at some point in the future. And I was wondering, for these items that have these ratings, how are they weighted? Is there a weighting for them in the analysis or screening? Or what's the methodology of using this tool to review projects for a go, no-go decision or inclusion or not?
Through the chair, that's a good question. These criteria are not the same as the TIP criteria. The
Right.
TIP criteria are, you can go through there and see that they are weighted, but they are, if you do that analysis, you see that they are not actually weighted by goal, if that makes sense. Some of the criteria pertain to several different goals. So we did not weight the goals with this plan, so, I mean, with the document so far. So it will just be a listing that we'll get from total points. Total points. And so every criteria is the same as.
They're all weighted the same, they're all one.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Okay. We have, okay,
Call for it.
so we have a vote?
Yeah, just
Yeah,
call for
okay.
it. Is there
Any objections to this, 1B? Okay, seeing none, moved and seconded, here's the motion to approve, okay.
Public comment.
This.
Yep, we
Oh,
missed
yeah,
it,
we did
we
that
missed it. Gonna go back in
Sorry.
time.
Any comments from the public? Thank you. Okay. Agenda item 5B, the 2040 Metro Health Plan, Tech Memo 2. Craig.
Through the chair, excuse me. I'm sorry. So, this had public review for a 2-week period, and we also had input from the Citizens Advisory Committee and all of the subcommittees. Mr. Weddleton did have comments, and so the Technical Advisory Committee, recognizing that this body wanted to approve documents in the future, forwarded their recommendation to you for approval of this document on last month, on September 14th.
Yes. If you have questions, Mr. McPherson is on the telephone, and he would be a very good person to ask.
Okay, any questions, comments from the committee? Okay, what's the will of the committee?
Move to accept. Second.
Okay, any objections?
Oh, wait, yeah, public input.
Oh,
Public
sorry.
input.
Any comments from the public?
Okay.
Okay. No. Any
Moved and
objections?
seconded.
Approving the motion? Okay, hearing none, the motion's approved. All right, Craig, any other action items?
No other action items.
All right. So we're moving on to agenda item 6A.
So, we can do this quickly.
Go ahead.
So the next two items, no, really, we can do this quickly. The next two items.
We
the
have to, the
UPWP
room is gonna get used
Yeah,
for something else in 15 minutes. We're gonna start getting kicked out of here, so we will be done at 3:30, whether we think we are or not.
Yeah, he's just eating up part of my time here. 6A and 6B are two items that are out for public review right now. They are posted on our webpage through a link. 6A is our work program for the next 2 years. This is staff time. What is staff going to be doing for the next 2 years? It's very similar to what we had the previous 2 years because we're still working on a lot of the same items. But that's that document right there. It's just informational today to let you know it is out for public review. So we're expecting it will be before you in November. We do not have our actual allocation to the dollar yet. We're required to get that by October 1st. But we have been assured that will probably be pretty similar to the previous allocation. So we're kind of budgeting on the same sort of task that we'll be doing. You will be happy to know that one of the items in here talks about the purchase of tablets so that when you get to your meeting here, you will have a tablet in front of you with all of the documents on there in PDF form. So you won't have all this paper. You will have paper copies for the public, but for you, you will have it that manner. So that's out for public review. That's the UPWP. Happy to answer any. Bye, John. Any questions on that?
Any questions coming from the committee, from the public? Okay. Steve?
Okay, so the second item relates to the criteria for the tip. These are also out for public review for 30 days. So the idea behind those is that, yes, so these will be up for review, and then we'll take it through the TAC and get their final thoughts on it. They did have a work session on it, and then it will come to you for your approval. You're the ones who approve these criteria so that we can use them. After they are approved, we will do a call for nominations, and then we will, a committee will get together and rank and score those, and we'll go from there through the building of it. We do have the roadway, the non-motorized, and the CMAQ, and in addition, we have the Transportation Alternatives Program. Keep in mind that these three, the first three, the roadway, non-motorized, and CMAQ, these are the ones that you decide the allocation of the funds, and these are our projects that we usually do. The TAP ones, these are ones that, they're not AMATS projects in that we don't just take a project and we put it in there and we're going to fund it. These are ones that are applied for by other government entities around us. So in other words, nonprofit entities or the school district or the Parks Department or the municipality of Anchorage, but not AMATS per se. But those criteria are out right now, they're similar criteria.
Excuse my daftness, but what is CMAQ?
Congestion mitigation and air quality. So we often fund plans in there, like the MTP could be in there. We do some things with the air quality business public education campaign. We fund replacement buses. We do some other things over with People Mover.
Okay, any other questions? Questions from the public? Okay, moving on to agenda item 6C, project update 2040 Metropolitan Transportation Plan.
I'm gonna have to say we have that. I think we just did that with those three MTP items.
Okay, all right, floor is open for comments from the committee.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Comments from
I would just say, that coming after 2 weeks of work tightly on the land use plan and then diving into this, I am sorry I'm underprepared for these conversations, but I promise to be more on the ball soon, so beware.
Okay.
Well, my comment has absolutely nothing to do with what we did here today. The good news is that they are the Muldoon overpass. They're tearing the old one down beginning tomorrow. In 3 weeks, it will no longer be there, and we will have our completed new overpass in Muldoon and Glen Highway.
Any comments from the public? Okay, thank you for your participation. It is 3:20 and we are gaveling out.